Welcome, everyone, and thank you for tuning into our last Bright Parent Learning Series for the season. We're also excited to have you here tonight. This month's session is Parenting When You Are Not Comfortable with Your Child's Peer Group. My name is Lakeisha Edwards Wilson, and I'm one of the Bright Family Engagement Coordinators. bryt stands for Bridge to Resilient Youth in Transition, which is an organization out of Brookline Center for Mental Health in Brookline, Massachusetts. bryt family engagement coordinators work with families across New England and facilitates monthly parenting, learning sessions, parent conversations, provide resources to families and to schools that will assist and support families with their needs. bryt helps students build and maintain high-quality Tier 3 general education short-term supportive services for students struggling with mental health and other significant medical issues. Just a reminder that our Parent Learning Series happens on the first Tuesday of each month, which are live on YouTube, and they are also recorded for you to view at your leisure. And then after that, we have our weekly parent conversations that take place every Tuesday, or I should say, the second week of each month is dedicated to parents with children who are in elementary or middle school. The third week of the month is dedicated to parents with children who are in high school. And the fourth week of each month is dedicated to BIPOC parents. We also have a Facebook page where we post some information for our monthly series, weekly parent conversation, and other supportive information. With that said, I will now introduce our speaker and presenter for this evening. Okay. So tonight we have Miss Janae Peters, and she has been a high school administrator, educator, higher administrator, consultant, leadership coach, and clinical social worker who integrates these perspectives to facilitate rational processes of discovery and transformation of individuals and organizational change. She has served as the Dean of Students at the Master's School of Hawken in Cleveland, Ohio, a school she helped design and open to transform education and the lives of those within the educational environment. In addition to her administrative role there, Janae was a founding faculty member of the Mastery School, where she contributed to the development and delivery of innovative curricula across subjects such as ethics, technology, cultural context, and public arts. Throughout her career, Janae has implemented policy and pragmatic shifts that center equity, justice, restorative practices. She has also supported schools in understanding the importance of family partnership to support adolescent learning and growth. She brings particular skill in coaching and process facilitation related to value-based conflict. Her work includes curriculum development, faculty support, individual and community engaged students support, and the creation of community programming that fosters a sense of belonging, agency, and trust among students and staff alike. Janae's K-2 experience also spans roles as a teacher, advisor, and curriculum designer, volleyball and softball coach, and residential life director at various schools in different regions, where she has focused on creating inclusive and student-centered learning environments. Janae earned a BA in English with the highest honors distinction from Kenyon College and her MSW in clinical social work with a focus of adolescent identity development in the educational environment from Smith's College School of Social Work. So with all that, I want to welcome Miss Janae tonight. Miss Janae, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Miss Lakeisha. I guess in short, I could have just said I spend a lot of time working with young people and thinking about them in all the different ways that you can. But thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you to the Bright team for having me. And thank you to anyone who's here and listening for indulging me today. This is one of my very favorite things. So I'm going to get started with sharing the screen and we will get going. All right. So I'm assuming we can all see all these bright colors and all of that. Okay, great. So welcome to tonight's webinar. I got really excited to think about talking about parenting when you're not comfortable with your kids' peer group. And part of that is as an educator, as an aunt, as a coach, like in all these roles, I actually get to hear a lot about young people complaining about when their parents just don't understand, right? Like I'm thinking about that Will Smith, their parents just don't understand. And I think we have such great opportunity in our connections with our children, with the young people in the world, to really figure out how to see them and how to see this experience in a way that's supportive to them. So we're going to dive into, I think, some of really the complexities of parenting. And I suspect that if you're someone who's here watching it, it's because you have questions. And as you're navigating your child's friendships and peer relationships, I think at the end of the day, I like to assume, I like to believe that we all want what's best for our kids, right? And sometimes that means having to face discomfort or concern about the people they hang out with. Sometimes it's like knowing that that person that they're dating is not who they're going to end up with. Sometimes it's, hey, you let these, these other your peers be mean to you, and I don't like that, like as a parent. But the thing that I think rings most true about young people and their friendships is that those friendships are incredibly important to their emotional and social development, right? And anything that we can do to understand how to engage with those relationships, especially maybe when we're not comfortable, is key. So I think as parents, it's pretty natural to be concerned about who your child is spending time with, maybe especially the older they get. And I think with an understanding of the variety of parenting that is available and accessible in the world, as we move through tonight's presentation, I know it's not an interactive place per se, but I'm going to be asking you as parents to engage with some inquiry questions. And these aren't designed just for reflection in an abstract sense, but it's designed to also help anyone who's listening to actively engage with the content. And part of, like I said before, part of that is that parenting, I think, is a deeply personal journey. And because we each bring our own experiences, biases, assumptions, and values into how we interact with our children's social lives, the reflection questions are meant not just to make you think, but also to help you connect some of the concepts we'll discuss tonight with your own experiences. So each of the questions that I'll ask after a little content is really to prompt a deeper understanding of how you approach your child's friendships, how your own socialization might have shaped your views on this, and how you can adapt your parenting strategies as your child grows and their peer relationships evolve. One of the things that happened in my planning for this, it had me thinking a lot about my parents and how they engaged this process. And it's one of those things where in the time when they gave me feedback, I was not happy. Retrospectively, I'm like, wow, my mom was right. She knew that person wasn't my friend, or she knew, she knew this wasn't going to go. But in the moment, you don't know anything, that's my friend. And you're very protective of these people that you've invited into your world. So again, in the spirit of what we're doing tonight, I think that that inquiry can help us to think about our specific situations, maybe our specific cultures, our specific environments, and the content I hope will be accessible to most. So as we begin, so the subtitle of this is really sort of understanding the dynamics of adolescent development and peer influence at every stage. Part of my focus on adolescent identity development in the clinical social work world and as an educator has been to look at how things work at different stages of the cycle, because that really does inform like how our relationships, I think, need to evolve in terms of how we center and guide young people. So as we begin, and we consider the challenge of parenting during developmental years, I think the need to stay connected to or with your child or with our children is universal, right? But it can become more difficult as they get older and become more influenced by their peer groups. This is the space where we really see how values that a family might hold start to get impacted and influenced by other families and their values as our young people. Sorry, I say students a lot, but as our young people really start to learn about other people, as they start to learn about other cultures, as we move around, as we I would say expand our realities, their realities start to shift. And you might feel uncomfortable with the people they hang out with or behaviors you observe in them. But the truth is that peer influence is a very natural part of their development. I have a colleague who talks about how, particularly adolescents, so that preteen to teenagers, their singular job in the world is actually to uncover and discover social dynamics. We ask them to do things like school and have responsibilities around the house and such, but developmentally, their job is actually to work to understand social dynamics. So, in the spirit of that, tonight we're going to explore how to support your child while they explore relationships outside of the family by focusing on how to understand child development and peer influence at each stage, how to support your child's need for belonging while staying engaged with their social lives, and then how to set boundaries that respect their independence yet maintain a healthy relationship. And the hope is that by the end of this session, everyone might go away feeling a little more confident or a little more reflective as you navigate these changes. And I was thinking a lot about what might be the sort of why behind the why of this. And what this comes down to, in my experience, is how you engage with your child right now at any stage, really. But how you engage with them right now and how you make them feel might determine the long-term strength of your connection to and with them. People often remember, even if you are moving from a space of understanding what you believe is best for your child, there's a lot that comes with what I like to talk about as agency. Some people talk about it maybe more specifically as autonomy. But how you engage with them right now, how they feel seen by you or not, how they feel cared for by you or not, can be a big difference maker as they're navigating some of these big changes in their worlds. So we're going to start by thinking about this pretty developmentally. So we're going to start by looking at how peer relationships evolve at different stages of development. And I think we know that as children grow, the way that they connect with peers and the pressures that they feel from their peer groups changes pretty dramatically. So in elementary school, when young people are around ages 5 to 11, peer relationships are still in the early stages. Prior to this, I think parents have the most control over, who they get to spend time with. And during this time, it's still like where you go, they go, right? But they do start to develop friendships and relationships in school. But they're still really learning the basics of friendship. They're learning things like sharing, like cooperating, like playing together. And peer influence exists in some ways. I mean, there's a lot to explore, but it's still very much developing. And their friendships are often based on common interests like games or activities. My two youngest nieces are 3 and 5, and if they see another child with a bluey shirt on or anything like that, like they go to it doesn't matter who that child's parents are, it doesn't matter what town that child is from, bluey is what bonds them together, and their tablets, because that's how they are right now. Um, but this time in their lives is called early socialization, right? So that's really about those basic social skills. Then when it comes to middle school age, so we're calling that around 12 to 14, that's when peer influence becomes pretty significantly more important. So that's when social pressures increase and children start exploring different identities. So at this time, this is when you start to see more peer comparisons and greater influence from friends. And social comparison happens more at the middle school stage than even at the high school stage. I don't think people that's arguable for sure, but it happens a lot because that's when they're seeing for the first time sort of how they might measure up, or which group they're in, or who chooses them or who sees them. And that plays a very significant role in shaping their identity during those years. I remember being in seventh grade, right? And, I was known as a goody two shoes, and I didn't mind that until one day I did. I got tired of being a goody two shoes and was like, I'm going to be bad today. And then everyone was like, what does she think she's doing? But like, I was comparing, I'm like, all these people are being bad. And I'm not like, what does it mean that I'm not? And it was a silly day. And I wasn't good at being bad, but I worked it out. I tried something on, and it helped me start to figure out what I wanted to do. And the conversation that I had to have with my mom when they called home about that, also did that too. But I was tired of being the good one, in my friend group. I think people see this a lot in high school as well, where the teenagers' peer groups become central to their identity. So it's not just developing, it's not just a comparison, it's central. And behind that, this desire for acceptance is at its peak, right? And a lot of their decisions might be influenced by their peers. And at this time, a lot of identity formation, if anyone is familiar with identity development theories, a lot of identity formation is happening because the young people are really working to develop a stable sense of self. Um, and there it's the in group, out group. It's really that desire for belonging within social groups. So a teenager might go through phases where they switch friend groups or experiment with new looks or engage in activities to fit in with their peers that you might say, I don't recognize you right now. And this is a normal part of identity exploration, where the peer group really creates the wave of how they start to try on different versions of a self. One of the my favorite theories is the ecological systems theory, and you'll hear in a lot of what I share today. I'm a big theory person, but I'm not like theory before practice. To me, I'm just like, oh, that theory reminds me of how Uncle such and such did blank, and so that's the spirit of this offering. And with Yuri Bronfenbrenner and the ecological systems theory, it's a framework that really explains how a child's development is influenced by multiple layers of their environment. So it emphasizes that development does not happen in isolation, but is shaped by interactions between the child and their surrounding systems. So this theory, I think, really comes in handy when it comes to thinking about how peer relationships develop, because it helps us understand that a child's social world is influenced by their immediate family, peers, school, community, and broader societal forces. You can see on this uh, graphic that the young person is in the middle and their microsystem, family, school and workplace, religious group, and peers are all at the same level. And I think sometimes when I see it in that way, it helps me to make more sense of like the strength of peer relationships. We're very social beings. And that microsystem, those are the child's immediate surroundings. And the with the peer and family being the most immediate and most influential sort of individuals in shaping the child's social experiences, I think it really highlights the status that they have. Because I think, and you can ask questions about this too, because there might be some places it's like family is everything, and anyone who's not family, there's a little bit after that. And there might be people where that's not the foremost value. So it might be my friends or the family I create, are foremost. And I think as you are assessing the strength of your child's peer relationships, you might witness the times that they might choose their peers over a family activity, which I think is a lot more difficult to hold if you're not very comfortable with who they're spending their time with, but it's a truth of the space. And I think one thing that I'll say here before moving on here too is that I think one thing that this graph helps me to see is how many messages young people are getting from the world about what's important. If you look at this, if you just imagine a person standing in the middle of three different circles, and you have a message coming to them from each of these areas, and you think of who's most immediate, they spend a lot of time in their school day with their friends, right? They spend a lot of their social time, whether they're on teams or in other activities, with their friends. So the biggest messages, the most pronounced messages are coming from that area. And it's just something that I like to show to see. And um, I think that all of this is still influenced by the larger systems at play, which I think this graph also offers. So it's not just their peers whose values you might not be comfortable with, or whose family's values you might not be comfortable with. It's also the messages that they're receiving from the larger world and from the media that are connected to that. So I just think that awareness of this theory helps us to see things or put things where they are, and make informed choices about how we support our children's social interactions and support them in navigating the challenges in their peer groups, which always come and are bound to come. And so now that we've talked a little bit about the broader context and how the broader environment shapes a child's development, let's talk a little bit about cognitive development. So that's the way your child's thinking and decision-making skills evolve and how that impacts their ability to navigate peer relationships. Because a lot of the parenting while being uncomfortable with your child's peer groups, a lot of that is actually about navigating your relationship with your child as they navigate the peer relationships. Um, and this also might help us to understand changes in behavior in young people, and particularly like why a child might act impulsively in social situations or be swayed by peer pressure in ways that I think sometimes disappoint us if I'm speaking from truth. It's like, ah, I thought you were going to make a decision around that. And yet here we are. So, when it comes to the adolescent brain and cognitive development, I think the key to understanding how kids process peer influences and social decisions is understanding this. So, as kids are younger, so in elementary at that stage, they're developing basic emotional regulation skills. So, their ability to think about consequences is very limited, which is why they might if you think of younger children, why they might act impulsively in social situations. And so, because there's limited impulse control at this stage, um, and we know that their brains are still developing, I think we sometimes understand in context like what this means. So, in elementary school, a kid might take a toy from a friend during playtime because they haven't yet learned to think about how that action can make the other person feel. They're often learning, and that's a place where they engage that, but they haven't yet quite learned to really know that. Whereas in middle school, the brain is really starting to develop faster, but the prefrontal cortex, so the part of our brains that helps with decision making is still very much maturing, which leads to impulsive decisions, emotional reactions. Um, and so the part that helps them like plan for the future, understand the consequences of actions, like that's still very much in development. And that might make a child choose to fit in with friends or choose an experience that makes them feel good in the moment, but might have negative consequences later. And that I think is pretty typical of middle school children. And then by high school, the prefrontal cortex is more developed, still not all the way there, but emotional regulation is still maturing. So that's when peer influence is powerful, and teens are often seeking approval from friends, even if they know it's not the best choice, right? And I think what's key here is that emotional regulation, the ability to manage emotional responses. Um, at this time, because adolescents or because teens in particular are learning to control their emotions, they still might have very strong reactions to social pressures. So your teenage child might choose to participate in a risky activity to impress their friends, even though they know it's not the best decision. And part of what's happening here is that this is an emotional decision that is driven by peer influence. So we're getting to our first sort of level of inquiry, or something that I think as a parent, I am often asking myself at different stages. And now that we've explored like a little bit of this cognitive development, we're going to reflect on how these cognitive changes might help us as parents respond more empathically or empathetically when your child acts impulsively or makes emotionally driven decisions. And so the questions that I think are good to hold in this area include, how can I empathize with my child's reactions and behavior, knowing that their brain is still developing? And then what are some examples of situations where my child may act impulsively, and how can I respond in a supportive way? So when we think about these questions in this way, It might help us respond with patience, understanding, or at least open communication channels as we're trying to understand what this experience is revealing about our children. And so now we're going to move on. I'm throwing some things at you, but it's because I think it all works together. But we're going to move into talking a bit about socialization and bias, both conscious and unconscious. So it's important, I think, to talk about how socialization shapes our perceptions and how we view our child's friendships. And we all go through socialization where we learn how to interact with others based on our family, culture, and societal norms. And these influences really affect how we perceive our child's friendships and how we judge their peers, right? So, socialization, I think a quick way to talk about that is like how we learn about the world around us. So, values, norms, and behaviors. And then when I use bias or unconscious bias, it's referring to the automatic judgments that we make about others based on stereotypes or past experiences. Um, so as a parent, you might feel uncomfortable with your child's friends because they come from a different cultural background or one that you don't recognize, one you're not familiar with, or dress in a way that you associate with a certain stereotype. And recognizing a bias like this can help you open up to your child's social world with more empathy and understanding. One of the things I think we're often talking about how parents can support and guide children, but there's also something that happens the other way around. They also expand our realities. They support our growth as well. And so this is something that I have found, I think, to be crucial in these situations. And one theory that I use to get self-reflective, or I think is important for families to utilize. I end up doing this a lot in my work with young people in schools and family partnership in the learning experience. And it's really exploring the cycle of socialization. So this one is a very useful framework, I think, for understanding how we as individuals develop our sense of identity, our behaviors, our biases, particularly in relation to our social world. So this cycle, if anyone wants to explore it outside of here, really helps explain how we're taught in the social roles we occupy, how we learn what is acceptable in society, and how those lessons are reinforced throughout our lives. So the cycle itself is continuous. It's not like you move through and then you're like, I'm done with that. We're always moving through it. And it starts with some of our earliest experiences, the earliest spaces where we learn about different experiences, different identities, different norms. Like all of that starts here. And so that first stage of the cycle, so the beginning, the lens of identity, that really posits that from birth, we're immersed in social norms and values from our family and early environment that influence how we perceive the world and our place in it. One way that I like to think about this, because I think this is really a crucial, uh, it's the foundation, right? So for this, if you think about how your own family defined what was normal or acceptable, maybe your family emphasized certain values like respect or achievement or inclusion. In my family, there were like heavy values around education, which shaped the lens through which I view others now. And then there's this point that's in the first socialization that's really key. So it's our first experiences with social roles and behaviors, like how we treat others, how we express emotions, or how we navigate friendships. Those are all crucial in social identity. And we often see this play out a lot in elementary school, right? So in elementary school, children are often socialized into groups based on shared activities or behaviors, and they learn how to follow rules, be a part of a group, and learn how to behave with their peers. But the thing is, like, it's also being influenced by the things that they have already learned in their family. And they might find themselves gravitating towards folks whose behaviors or shared activities are similar to theirs. And other times they might gravitate towards someone whose experiences are novel to them. They're like, ooh, that looks interesting. I want to go play with that person who's doing flips instead of sitting here at reading time. And so a lot of this stuff really does influence everything the same. And I'm not going to go through all the stages of the cycle of socialization, but I want to name that it's important because it shows us how our social norms, our biases, and behaviors are really taught and reinforced. And we're constantly interacting with social institutions, with schools, religious spaces, peer groups, and cultural messages that shape who we are and how we see others. So I think when we use this to reflect on our own influences, our own biases and perspectives on our child's friendships and peer groups, if we look back at this cycle, we can identify the things that have shaped our understandings of what's acceptable in our child's friendships. And we can hold this question that asks, like, is there something from our own upbringing that's influencing how we view our child's peer group today, right? And I think this comes in handy, especially when we recognize the ways in which our child might be different from us, or the ways in which their upbringing is different from ours. And a lot of those changes do happen pretty quickly in generations, I would say, these days. But this cycle, I think, really allows us to become aware of how deeply ingrained those influences are for us and can help us understand what the level of conversation we might need to have with our young person might be. So the simple questions connected to this for me are how might my own biases influence my perception of my child's friends? And am I projecting any of my childhood experiences onto my child's friendships? And I don't think that there's a right or wrong answer to this. It's awareness of what your answer is that I think can support the conversation with your young person, where you're also showing, you're modeling for them how to navigate difficult social situations as well. Um, so I think that the next thing, and I'm mindful of time, I got my timer on, so bright team, I'm on track right now. But I think the thing to note is like we have all gone through socialization processes, right? And that shapes how you parent. And I actually think the key to parenting during this time is reflecting on your own experiences and recognizing any unconscious biases that you hold that might be connected to that. Um, and in addition to the inquiry questions from before, these specific ones, I think, can really be revealing. And they include how were my childhood friendships shaped by my family's values and social circles? And in what ways might my socialization influence how I view my child's friends? So just naming these things, reflecting on these things can really set you in a space where you understand how your own history impacts how you approach friendship in general and friendship for your child in particular, and just bring a little more consciousness to navigating those dynamics. So we're going to move into talking a little bit about identity development and individuation, which is also impacting, I think, your response to your child's choices at this time. And identity development is one of the most significant processes during childhood and adolescence. And as children move through the different developmental stages, they really work to build a cohesive sense of self. That's influenced by peer relationships, family values, the social environment, and it refers to the process of individuation in particular, refers to the process of differentiating oneself from others, especially parents, and forming a distinct identity. And so this involves exploring different roles, experimenting with new behaviors, navigating complex social relationships, including friendships, peer groups, and eventually romantic relationships really fall into there. And the way that your child forms their identity will impact how they approach their peer relationships, how they navigate challenges, and how they make decisions about who they want to be in the world. So I think as parents, like our role is to support this process without being over controlling and allowing them to explore and grow into their authentic selves. Um, Pretty quickly, I was a person in my family who aren't people who have a lot of piercings, but I was the first in my immediate family to like get a second ear hole or to get a tattoo. And my mother, you could have like you would have thought that I had actually, I don't know, done something really terrible to her. That's what it felt like to her. It felt like I was going against the family values. And she actually reflected to me, this is now 3 decades later. She said the other day, she said, the only thing I really remember about that time outside of being really mad at you is that you said to me, I didn't do this to be against you. I did it for me. And that was like when I look back at that, I was like, I was really signaling individuation at that time. And wait, I didn't know that language at that time, but that's what I was doing. I was just like, I might be different from my family in this way. That doesn't mean I'm different in every way, but I might be different in this way. And across the stages in identity development, so in elementary school, um, this is really I think I want to go to this next slide. No, I don't, I guess. Um, this is really the time where, let me get back here. Okay, thank you. This is really the time where uh, in elementary, we're learning basic social skills, starting to understand group dynamics. At the middle school level, right, there, young people are exploring different identities. They have increased peer pressure and stronger social comparison. And then for that last stage at the high school level, it's really about forming that cohesive sense of self and achieving greater independence from family. It's literally a developmental milestone for them to be achieving greater independence from family and creating an identity that might be connected to the family's identity, but might not. And peer groups, as you can imagine, are really essential to this process. They like I would say more actually than family, because family has been there the whole time. Teens really begin to solidify their sense of self based on peer group values and interests. And this is actually the time where they should begin to question family values and cultural norms, and where they seek validation and connection from their peers. So at this stage, individuation is fully underway as they work to separate themselves. So as you work to parent them, what you're also working against is their kind of pull from you, however slight or however wide, it's a pull from you. So you're navigating both the pull and working to maintain a connection. And Eric Erickson, who wrote a lot about identity development, says that at this stage, and this is particular to high school, where peer groups are central, that identity versus role confusion is key. And this is where they again explore who they are, what they stand for, and how they relate to this world. I think in a lot of the world today, we see this really surfacing with differences in political values. We see this with differences in understanding of larger social processes. And you can imagine that teens are really banding with their peers around this and experiencing a lot of discord, I think, oftentimes with families around this. Um, so this is actually still a very healthy part of their identity formation as they try to figure out who are outside of the family structure, because ultimately they might come back to it, but they have to explore outside of that to figure out if that's where and who they want to be. So I think in the spirit of moving on, I just want to name that affirmation and validation are a lot of what teens are looking for. And when you offer or share dislike in a peer or peer groups, you're not offering affirmation and validation, and that can be hard for them, right? So what because peers are often helping teenagers in particular understand their values, interests, and strengths. One of the things that parents can do is actually also affirm and validate the things that you can, not over affirm, not over validate, or not move inauthentically, but care about them and show them that you can affirm the way that they handle a challenging situation, the way that they stand up for someone. So you're really affirming and validating pro-social behaviors. Um, Peer relationships really are a testing ground for adolescents to figure out their identity. And sometimes the more you go against it, the closer they go to those things, as opposed to turning back towards you as family. And I think that just one way that we can support identity development as parents, actually, I just want to say, as a parent, your support in this process is essential. And when we want to answer the question of like how we can help our child develop a healthy sense of identity without over controlling their process, one of the things that we can do is encourage exploration. Um, I think I'm going to move here. Encourage exploration and support their exploration of different roles and interests. Let them experiment with new ideas, new hobbies, new social groups. Don't be too critical of those changes. Your role is to be supportive and open-minded as they continue to explore who they are. And you're really serving as a secure base, right? So while you allow them to explore, you're always there. You're the person that they can come back to. You offer unconditional positive regard, unconditional love, acceptance, and open communication, but not without boundary, right? This helps your child feel secure in their self-exploration. I talked a little bit already about validating their feelings. Adolescence is a very emotional and trying time, like as young people are growing into themselves. So acknowledge those emotional experiences. And even if you don't always agree with their choices, show that you understand their feelings, because that goes a long way in maintaining a strong bond. And then lastly, I would say really set healthy boundaries. And so while it's important, it's my timer, while it's important to give teens independence, boundaries should always still exist. And make sure that your young person knows what's acceptable and what isn't, and leave room for them to learn from their experiences. The inquiry that you can see here around this is like, how can I support my child's exploration of identity at any stage? And how can I balance respecting their growing independence with while offering guidance and connection? So some of the things that I would have talked a little more about, but I think people really know this, and I'll make sure that there's time and space for the Q&A. It would be about supporting them in navigating belonging at each stage, right? So as children grow, the need for belonging becomes more central to their emotional and social well-being, and we see that in this need for peer relationships. And if, as parents, we make moves that leave them isolated or having experiences of isolation, it plays into it turns into an adversary, I would say, to them having that need met. So that's just something to note. And then there are a lot of good thinkers who are talking about boundaries and how families can create boundaries and be clear around those boundaries and expectations while supporting some flexibility for young folks as they navigate peer relationships. Lisa D'Amour is one, I think, really well-respected expert in adolescent development who talks often about the importance of creating clear boundaries while allowing teens to explore their independence. And then there's also a great thinker named Nedra Tawwab who talks about working on setting healthy boundaries as a parent and as a family, both, and I think ways to support young people in creating and setting boundaries with their peers. So those are two things that I'll name that we won't get to today. And then just for some of the takeaways, um, I'll add here, boom, boom, boom. It's taking a little that it's like understanding your child's cognitive and emotional development at each stage to better engage with their friendships is really key. Reflecting on your own world, your own history, your own biases, and how they shape your perception of your child's peer group. Supporting your child's identity development by balancing that independence with guidance, validating your child's need for belonging while also making sure that or supporting healthy relationships, and then setting clear, flexible boundaries that evolve with your child's development and encourage positive peer relationships. And then finally, and I think this is key, encouraging open communication at all stages. To me, one of the things I talk to young people about all the time is actually the importance of keeping the conversation going with the adults in their world. So anything that parents can do to encourage open communication, focusing on understanding rather than judgment, I think is pretty key. So we covered a lot of ground tonight, and I'm happy to pass it back to the bryt team just to see if there are any questions or any reflections that folks have after tonight. So thank you all for sticking with me.
Hi, Janae. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Mhm.
I'm kind of reflecting as you're talking about this. My four children are not children anymore. They're out of the house, but I'm thinking about I really would have benefited from this presentation when they were, as they were growing and changing, because I don't know that we get a lot of coaching as parents in this area.
Yeah.
Um, my wondering is like, how do you start a conversation with your child or your teen about their, concerns about their judgment around friendships and what those friendships are doing, especially if they're like unsafe behaviors?
Yeah. One of the things that I think is always key is, or what's always in our area of expertise is sharing how things impact us. So, and I'll say this interestingly, in my work as a dean of students, I was often in conversations with young people who were making risky choices or, making decisions that might, you know, had potential to do harm to themselves or to others. And I would start the conversation by asking them, what was going on for you? As you were thinking about that, really opening it up to them being like experts of the feeling, because at this stage, like it's not always going to be true that they know, like they're like, I was doing this because blah blah blah, but you might be able to access the feeling that they had before they made that decision. And I think that over time, what that means is that you might be able to know patterns. And you're like, I notice sometimes when you feel scared, it seems like you make a decision that ultimately causes some harm to you. And I think when we see them in that way, when we recognize patterns and are able to say it again without judgment, but from a place of care, they're often able to hear things differently, in my experience. I think also just keeping in mind that sometimes they need to say a thing for themselves in order for it to be true, if that makes sense. And one of the things I've used a lot over time is creating space with open questions. And I think the people whose life I'm in, whether it's from my children to nieces, nephews, like they know they experience me sometimes as critical. And so I say, well, okay, if you know my baseline is critical, then this isn't personal. And I might say, I don't understand how we ended up here. Basically, like this is what you said you wanted to do. But this is what you did in this moment. Let's talk about it. And then they say it for themselves and they're like, yeah, I guess I didn't realize that that's what I was doing. But if I had just said, this is what you're doing, it would have gone nowhere. So I think, does that start to answer that question?
Absolutely. Thank you. That was really helpful.
I really, really enjoyed how you sort of explain it for middle school, high school, and elementary. I love the way you broke it down. It was really, really helpful to me. I have a middle schooler,
Hmm.
uh, and I find myself sitting on my hands a lot and biting my tongue a lot with her French, especially now that she's in eighth grade
Hmm.
and entering high school soon. So I want her to have her independence, but at the same time, I'm like terrified, of the decisions that sometimes she makes. Um, how do you know if a friendship is there ever a time when the friendship can be forbidden, like that you just it's against your values, or there's something really off about that
Yeah.
friend that you just it scares you and it's not, and you've sort of done your little checklist and you've been like, okay, I'm not projecting, I'm not
Mm.
there's something actually off here.
Yeah. Some of the, yeah, I love that question. And part of it, I think really some of that work starts early on, right? So when I talked about like the family boundaries and family expectations, I think it can be made clear to a young person. This is what we can talk, like, we are open, we are flexible, but these are the boundaries of what we can sit by and tolerate. I can remember, um, I want to say like this would have been 10th grade maybe. There was a friend, we had walked maybe 3 miles to go to some boy's house, right? Um, got caught all the way up because my dad is a person who's everywhere and knows everybody. And they sat me down and said, hey, we love her. We love you. We don't do that. And they're like, what we won't tolerate is you lying about where you're going, because when you lie, that means that I'm expecting you to be at this place. And if I hear that something happens at that place, I don't even think of you because you're supposed to be at this place. And so they made it clear to me that any situation, any peer relationship I was in where I would that I wouldn't say like made me lie because that takes my agency, but where I felt that lying was the best choice, was not a relationship that they could tolerate. And they would give me like one try. So after that, like I still was able to maintain my friendship with them, and she's still one of my close friends now, but we could not, we were never trusted to go anywhere without a parent dropping us off or anything like that. So I do think that naming the bounds and boundaries of what is acceptable in your family, again, is something that happens pretty early on, but continues to happen throughout. And I do think that um, it's not that everyone should be in a free for all. Like, I think it should be clear to people what happens if they violate that boundary, and that you have to stand on that too.
That's so helpful. Thank you.
Um, what should parents do if their child really becomes defensive, and shuts down when a discussion happens around friendship groups? And just even the topic of friendships come up, and why might they become so defensive?
Yeah. I talked early on about like expanding realities. I think it's also important to expand supports. So knowing or having a sense of who your young person might see as supportive is a really important thing. There have been situations, my sister gets upset sometimes that I'm her oldest daughter's safe space. And she's like, you guys, I feel like you're talking about me. We're not, I'm helping you. But she can't know how much I'm helping you. So I think identifying the adults in your child's world, or just older supports in your child's world, who they don't get as defensive around, is one thing to do. As dean of students, or as a person who was in the position of creating advisory assignments and understanding like how to get teenage young people to connect with the adults in our community, I always ask this question of them, like, who's an adult you admire? And I think a lot of people think that young people want nothing to do with adults, and I have not found that to be true in 16 years. They don't always know how to access the adult support, but there's some adult that they think is cool or makes the idea of being adult a little less scary to them. And I think in that moment, Julie, I would say before that moment, I would work to identify who their safe people are, who their supportive people are, and partner with that person and not give in to ego around who helps. Because as long as someone supports your child, like they're getting the support that they need. And for some reason, it's not always the parent who can be that for certain things. And so I just think expanding their network in sly ways before things get real, or recognizing who they admire, who their go-to people are, can also expand your support network too.
Thank you.
Oh, and the other part of your question was about young people getting defensive. That is just a mode, defensive, snippy, all of that. And that's actually another thing to have some sort of boundary around. There are many good reasons, I think, to have space for young people to authentically express themselves. And that's not going to work out for them in some of the sort of institutional socialization spaces either. So I think like having a boundary around like treatment that you'll accept from a young person is also key in that moment. Because if defense is just like, I don't want to talk to you, that's one thing. But if it's, if there's still an exchange in a relationship, and it's not just one way.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm in schools also, and I would agree that there's a mode of response, and I even sometimes get flummoxed, when a kid is aggressively talking, and it's something that I've been really thinking about personally, like what do you tolerate, and how do you respond to that in a way where you maintain composure? Because it's really easy to get dysregulated yourself and then escalate things further and take it personal when it's not necessarily personal. And sometimes it is, but yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question around it's not around parents, it's around being an educator or being a teacher in a classroom, and you sort of see these peers together and it's really wrong, and do you notify the parent, and like how do you address that? It's like are you stepping on boundaries? It's
Mhm.
a hard one, but you sort of know that this is not a good relationship.
That's interesting. In those kinds of situations, one of the things that I would do as a dean of student, I would often make maps of issues. So I might say, say we have Victoria, and I don't know why I'm picking on you today, Julie, but say we have Victoria and Julie, and you're like, Victoria was always proactive, was often, got her work in early, was doing everything, and then she started hanging with that Julie. And now, they're talking through class, like she's been a little snippier, like she snapped at me when I asked where her homework was. And I think in that case, one thing I found over time is like it's important to imagine the experience for both of the young people before thinking about what to do next. And I do think that it's a fair conversation to say, hey, like here's how I experienced you before. Here's how I'm experiencing you now. This is the only thing that I see that has changed. Is there something else that's helpful for me to know? And I'm thinking about like the Victoria whose behavior has mostly changed, right? It might be, it might be that a conversation with the family. I have had those conversations with families where I would say, hey, just like I said, like I noticed this, this has changed. I don't know if this is the why. But it feels like there are some conversations that might be more supportive at home than at school. And then there are sometimes situations where it's not necessarily impacting schoolwork or academics, but you might notice them getting more and more isolated or notice like really sharp changes or maladaptive behaviors. And I do think that those are reasons to partner with families to say, I don't think I could tell you the root of this, but I can tell you that this is a change that has happened in this young person's life. Now, the reason I noted a map is that it's also interesting to see what's going on for Julie. This might be Julie's first friend, and Julie just doesn't know how to be friends with people yet, right? So, like thinking about, what we can learn about Julie's experience and how to support people in being better friends to each other is something that I often do. So, at the school, at the mastery school, where we often feels like that's a large marker of time. We actually had courses on identity and belonging, where we talked about friendship, where we talked about healthy peer relationships and healthy boundaries and all those kinds of things. And that's a space where we would do a little bit of that work to say, Victoria, do you really want to be friends? Like, we wouldn't say, do you really want to be friends with Julie? But it might be like, what kind of friends are you looking for? Oh, do you have those friends? Like everything that you described is not quite what's happening. So just something that gets them to explore and name and then start to make their own decisions, I find to be an important thing. But yeah, I don't think it's ever too early to have family partnership. But I think sometimes we're quick to assign a response to a shift that we see, and we might not have a full picture. So it's always good to navigate that with some humility, I think.
Well, thank you so much. This has been such an incredible evening. I've learned a lot, and you have so much knowledge, and I really feel like that my takeaways here are just really, really pausing and looking at all the developmental processes of each child and where they're at, where they're learning. And when I'm with young people, with my friends, young people, and then when I'm with my daughter who's in middle school and high school, and just sort of how it all looks. So thank you so much for all of this. Um, we're just going to wrap up because I can't believe it's 8 o'clock. It's unbelievable how fast things went. So I want to thank you again. It's been such a pleasure, and I want to remind people that we have this is our last month. I can't believe that either. Wow, this is the end. So this is our last month of having family engagement conversations. We meet as I'm going to just remind people that we meet elementary next week on the second Tuesday of the month. And then we also have middle school on the third Tuesday of the month. And on the fourth Tuesday of the month, we have our BIPOC family engagement conversations. So to continue these conversations and ask more questions about what we talked about tonight or whatever comes up, please, please, please join us. We'd love to have you. So I want to thank everyone tonight and the Bryt Family Engagement team, and have a good night, everybody.